I finished creating my first Half-Life map. It's also the first map I've completed for any game. Every project I start, whether it's a map or a game or something else, rarely ever gets finished. So that's why I'm excited to have finally finished and released a project of mine. Before you watch this video, if you want to play my map, I'll leave a download link in the description. Installation instructions are included in the download. I'll appreciate any feedback or first impressions of my map. If you just want to see how I made this map, feel free to keep watching here. Even though this is my first completed Half-Life map, I did have some previous Half-Life mapping experience. I made little test maps where I experimented with different elements and features. Those maps were not playable levels, but they did help me learn how to use the mapping tools for Half-Life, like the J.A.C.K editor. Along with experimenting with the J.A.C.K editor myself, I also watched mapping tutorials on YouTube. Mainly tutorials by J.A.C.K and Admer456. So if you want to learn how to map for Half-Life yourself, I would highly recommend their tutorials. I also had other inspirations that got me into mapping. 3 Clicks Phillips' Making of Disparity series is really interesting to watch through to see the entire process of making a map. I also read John Romero's Doom guidebook, which shared a lot about his game and level design thought processes. Half-Life, the game itself, is also one of my inspirations. Looking through all its maps and seeing how Valve designed their game is really interesting. And Half-Life's 25th anniversary documentary was really fun to watch and learn from. After seeing all the creations made by these cool game and level designers, I really wanted to make my own map too. I just had to figure out what kind of map I was going to make. I work at a grocery store, and I often have to go into the freezer. One day I was thinking that all the racks and boxes might be able to make for a fun map. Half-Life also has a freezer map, so I thought that would be perfect because that means I would already have freezer textures to use. The freezer idea is pretty much the only idea I had going into this. The rest of the map just kinda grew as I was making it. Though the freezer was my only idea going into it, it wasn't even the first part of the map I made. I needed an area for the player to start because I didn't want the player to start in the freezer, I wanted them to start outside of the freezer. So I made the player start outside. Literally. I just got done watching J.A.C.K's tutorial with Richter Overtime on how to make terrain, so I wanted to make terrain too. When I was making this part, I wasn't all that fast at mapping, and I was even slower at making terrain, so it took me forever to make this outdoor area, an area that doesn't even have any gameplay. But as I kept on making this map, I got even faster at mapping. When I got to making the last few rooms of the map, I was able to create those rooms way faster than the rooms I made first at the beginning of the map. This entire map took around a month of on and off work, but I think I'll be able to make my next map faster and better. When I would create the rooms in this map, I had no idea what they were going to be realistically. I had a general idea of what I wanted the rooms to be, but I didn't create them in a way that would make sense in the real world. Why would there be a general storage area in the freezer? Why would the freezer not be closed off? Why would there be a ladder that leads from a lab area to a facility area? Why would a freezer lead to a bottomless pit? There's plenty more examples of this map not making any real world sense, but I think you get the point. The reason the map ended up like this is because I was focusing more on gameplay than realism. A freezer leading to a bottomless pit doesn't make any real world sense, but it makes for interesting gameplay. Half-Life also has this problem in some of its maps. Residue processing comes to mind. It's a fun chapter, but a lot of it doesn't make real world sense. The next time that I make a map, I'm going to block out the entire thing first, try and stick to a theme, and think about what I'm making as a real place as well as a video game level. I'm also going to rewatch Admer's video on building a room because it had a lot of helpful tips. This is my first map, and there's no reality where it's perfect. The enemy and item placement isn't perfect either, but I think I did a better job at it than I did making a realistic map. At first, I didn't give too much thought to the enemy placement. I didn't assess the different enemy types' strengths and weaknesses until later on. I think the enemy encounters are better towards the end of the map. I tried to teach the player early on that Vortigaunt's attacks can be blocked by boxes, but the Vortigaunts can also break those boxes because there's many scenarios in this map where something like that happens. I also tried to teach the player that headcrabs can break out of vents and attack. Something I should have taught the player earlier is that enemies can teleport into the map. because this happens quite often later on. While making this map and placing all the enemies down, I learnt the importance of nodes for helping the enemies pathfind to reach the player. Originally, I hadn't placed down any nodes, and I was wondering why the pathfinding of the enemies was so bad. Turns out that nodes are not optional. The enemies need the nodes to help them navigate around the map. For example, this zombie in this room would not be able to get out and find the player if they ran away, but after placing some nodes down, it could easily navigate out of this room and find the player. Another example where nodes made this map better is in these high up areas where the Vortigaunts teleport in. I placed these nodes on the edge so that the Vortigaunts would be able to attack the player more easily, and so the player has better visibility of them. Nodes are necessary for maps with NPCs. Another cool thing I did with the enemies is made what I like to call enemy sequences, where a list of events happens to make the enemy encounters more interesting. Just watch this first enemy sequence to see what I mean. What I wanted to happen here is for the player to see these two zombies and start attacking them, but as the player is running around, a headcrab will teleport in behind them. The player will then need to adjust. However, as the player is adjusting, another headcrab will break out of this vent and attack. Just as the player is getting done with the zombies and headcrabs, a Vortigaunt will teleport in up here next to these explosives. The player can run to cover to hide from the Vortigaunt's ranged attack, but they might run into this barnacle, which will pull them up so the Vortigaunt can reach them. And when the player enters this room, they may also be sort of low on ammo, so they may need to scavenge around while avoiding headcrabs and the Vortigaunt's attacks. I placed these explosives next to the Vortigaunt to give the player a quick and fun way to deal with it. Maybe this sequence is too chaotic, a little too difficult, and maybe a bit overwhelming for the player, but I thought it was fun when I tested it. But I do think the second enemy sequence is better. Take a look for yourself. In this one, I made a Vortigaunt teleport in above the player again. This time the player has these metal barriers to hide behind, and the Vortigaunt is able to break them. The player will need to deal with the Vortigaunt before it destroys all their cover, and this time there's no explosives to make handling the Vortigaunt easier. I also made a headcrab teleport in shortly after the Vortigaunt so it can force the player away from cover, and if the player decides to just make a run for it, they'll be blocked by a zombie. I think this sequence is better than the first. It's still chaotic, but I think that's just part of the fun. The rest of the enemy encounters are just basic uses of headcrabs, zombies, and Vortigaunts. Those are actually the only enemies I used throughout this map. Looking back, I think I used too many Vortigaunts. I should have added more enemy variety like hound eyes and bull squids. I also don't think I balanced the map all that well. There's too many enemy encounters and not enough puzzle solving and scavenging. I only gave the player access to 2 weapons in this map, the crowbar and pistol. Optionally, the player can get access to grenades if they hunt around a bit. I deliberately wanted the player to have limited firepower to make them think about their weapon usage more. If the player doesn't use their ammo or resources carefully, they could end up in a bad position later on in the map. This is also a way to reward the player for exploring because they'll have an easier time if they have extra ammo and grenades. I placed and balanced the items based on the enemies' positions. I moved the items around to try and get the balancing right. It just took a lot of playtesting to finally get the item placement right. In some areas there would be too many health kits which made the map feel too easy. Sometimes there wouldn't be enough health kits making the map feel too hard. The same thing happened with ammo too. Sometimes there would be too much ammo to know what to do with, and other times there wasn't enough ammo. Eventually I got the item placement not perfect, but acceptable. I was the only one that actually play tested this map. When designing a game, map, level, or really anything, it's important to get feedback from others. I didn't get anyone to play test this map because I don't really have anyone to play test it for me. A lot of my friends don't have PCs or have never played or even heard of Half-Life before. I mean, Half-Life is like a decade older than me and a decade older than most of my friends too. I'm thinking of setting up an online community somewhere, maybe a Discord server for people watching my videos to join. It would be a good place for not just me, but also you to share maps, mods, games, and other creations. If I do end up making an online community somewhere, let me know if you'd join it. Also, let me know what platform you would like me to set it up on. Discord is pretty popular and most people already have it, so I'm thinking about making a Discord server. But I also know there's other options out there, so let me know which one you would prefer. Anyway, since I was the only one that playtested this map, it probably has quite a few oversights or issues. If you've played my map or if you plan to play it, if you've found any issues or you have feedback, you can just leave it in the comments for now. I'll appreciate any feedback I can get on this map. Similarly to the rooms and map layout, I made the story up as I went. In case you don't know what the story is, let me give you a brief rundown. This map is called Half-Life: An Important Rescue Mission. The player will need to go into Black Mesa and make their way through the freezers and facility while fighting aliens to get to the kitchen, so they can rescue and eat a pizza. Yeah, it's just meant to be a funny, unserious, and lighthearted story. I didn't really have a story when I started making it, I just wanted to make a map. As I kept making random rooms and placing random details around, the story just kind of came to me. I never intended on the story being a rescue mission, but I placed a running car outside the fence at the beginning of the map, and the only reason I put that car there was because I wanted to experiment with more lights, sounds, and details. But I thought about that car later on and decided it was kind of like the player getting out or being dropped off to go into the facility, which is kind of why I thought it was like a rescue mission. When the player starts the map, they don't directly know the reason why they're there, but that's something they learn while playing the map. If they read the title, they'll know that this is a rescue mission of some kind, but I think the story still works even if the player doesn't know that it's meant to be a rescue mission. The map has many flyers spread around advertising pizza, which is located in the kitchen fridge. This gives the player something to work towards as they play the map. These flyers were also one of the last things I added to this map. At the end of the map, the player will make it to the kitchen, open the fridge, and learn that they were working towards rescuing a pizza the entire time. The reason I decided on pizza is because I needed something to put in the fridge, which was originally just there for decoration. I made the kitchen and the fridge in it because I wanted to make a room which was different from the others in the map, and this just happened to be the last room I made. I placed a light above the fridge to draw attention to it, and another reason I made those flyers is so the player knows that there's something in the fridge. I also placed another flyer right next to the fridge for good measure, so that there's no way the player can miss it. These flyers were one of the custom textures I made. Adding custom textures to Half-Life is actually really easy. Modern game engines need PBR materials or other information to make the textures look good, but all Half-Life needs is an image. There are plenty of tools out there to turn regular image formats into a format that Half-Life can work with. The tool I used for this is called WADmaker. Custom textures can also be embedded into the map file during the compile stage, so the user doesn't have to worry about missing textures or putting WAD files in the wrong spot. The flyer texture was easy to make, I just typed out the text. And I made these signs by typing text onto an existing Half-Life texture. There's also this note which is supposed to be handwritten, so I drew the words with my mouse. The other custom textures I made were these crates, which are edited versions of crates in Half-Life. I created these crate textures to help with the puzzle. These pallets with the crates on them are blocking the path, so the player has to find a gun or grenades to blow up these explosive barrels from afar, which will then break the crates and clear the path. I wanted to make sure that these crates were different from other crates in the game, so I tried making these crates look reinforced to try and show the player that they can't just break them down with a crowbar. Technically, they can be broken down with the crowbar, it'll just take a really long time. I was inspired to make this puzzle because at the grocery store where I work, in the freezer, there's always something in the way or blocking where I need to get to. The explosives, on the other hand, were not inspired by my job at the grocery store. Those were inspired by Black Mesa. It's not that far-fetched to have explosive barrels in the freezer when the other freezers in Black Mesa literally had grenades in them. This is pretty much the only puzzle in the map, and it's not particularly hard either. I'm definitely going to try and put more puzzles in my next map though. I experimented with this map a lot. I wanted to really see what this engine was capable of, and also what I was capable of making. I added a lot of neat things like scripted sequences that would make zombies play animations, or make enemies teleport in and headcrabs break out of vents as seen earlier. I also made this cool sequence where this big door opens. It doesn't make any sense for this door to be here, but it sure is cool and it was fun to make. I did try making crates that move across these rails, but I couldn't quite figure it out, so I just made the rail broken in Universe 2. I'll figure out how these things work someday. Some of the elements in my map are copied from Valve-made maps. I used tools to decompile the maps made by Valve to see how they made things. Seeing how Valve made their maps is just as helpful for learning how to map as tutorials. The sequences that teleport aliens were taken directly from a Valve map. I also copied over things like this vending machine and trash can, or the props in this room. All these details are actually just brushes, which are like the building blocks used to construct maps. Games made in the Half-Life engine rarely use 3D models for details. Instead, details are constructed out of brushes. The brushes can be carved, formed, and put together to make convincing-looking details. They may not be as detailed as actual 3D models, but they have a certain charm to them, and they do the job. The details also need to be optimized. Half-Life maps use a technology called binary space partitioning to detect collisions and sort rendering. I can't explain exactly how it works because I'm still figuring that out myself, but I do know that these details will make the map less optimized because they'll add cuts into the 3D world, which means more leaves to sort through when rendering. One of the ways that Valve optimized their maps was to slightly hover details like signs off the walls so they wouldn't make cuts into the wall. Optimizing details is done differently now because we have more modern, community-made tools to make and compile maps. I used VHLT tools to compile my map, which came pre-installed with J.A.C.K. These modern compile tools add a custom brush entity called Func Detail. A simple explanation of what Func Detail does is it makes any brush it's applied to not cut into the 3D world, and the compile tools will also take into account that it is a detail and not part of the world geometry. This means that old methods like hovering a sign off the wall aren't needed anymore. I made sure to apply Func Detail to every detail in my map for the best optimization. Another thing that maps need to be optimized are hint brushes. Hint brushes give the compiler hints on where to break up BSP leaves. I made sure to spread these around the map in areas like doorways or hallways. I placed them anywhere that one area ends and a new area begins. Maps can also be optimized by applying null textures to faces that can't be seen. Null faces don't get rendered when in-game, and less faces to render means better optimization and more performance. So I went around and made every face that isn't viewable by the player a null face. I may have went a bit overboard with the null faces. I'm sure that there's at least one missing face visible from the play area, even though it's not intended for the player to no-clip out of the playable area and into these inaccessible rooms. If they do, they'll be greeted with a lot of missing faces. So next time, I'm not going to go too overboard with the null faces. With all these optimizations, you would think that this map is pretty optimized, but it really isn't. I didn't know much about map optimization going into this, so the map layout really does not lend itself to good optimization. There are many areas in the map where a lot of rooms are rendered all at once. This could have been prevented if I made some of these hallways longer or if I added more twists and turns. A Half-Life map with absolutely zero optimizations could be crushed by a modern computer. This map ran fine on my non-gaming laptop with integrated graphics, so I'm not too worried about it, especially since this is my first map, but that's still just an excuse. That's the mindset that gave us modern games that are very poorly optimized. My next map will have better optimization. Even though this map doesn't make much sense realistically, I did try to do things that make the environment feel like a real place. I made places that aren't accessible by the player to make the world feel bigger, like this road at the beginning or this collapsed hallway at the end. I really should add more areas like this in my next map. Even though we know that nothing is actually behind these areas, it's kind of fun to wonder what could be past these areas. I do want to mention the lighting in this map. It's not bad, but it's also not anything special either. I would just say that it's fine. Even though the lighting quality is limited in this game, some really neat effects can be used to add to the atmosphere. This game has colored lighting, spotlights, flickering effects. I use some of these throughout the map, like the flickering lights in this unreachable hallway. I used colored lighting to help guide the player. I made these lights breakable, and the lighting will go away with them. With some more thought put into the lighting, a really cool atmosphere could be created. I definitely want to experiment with lighting more in my next map. Something I did experiment a lot with is environmental sounds. Sounds can really make the map feel like it's a real place. Half-Life has a really cool sound engine, maybe even better than Half-Life 2. There's so many different presets that alter how sounds are perceived by the player. I use these in every area of my map. Sounds in the freezers have some reverb that makes it sound like you're in a metal room. And sounds in the tunnels have a lot of reverb and echoes. And sounds in the concrete rooms are dampened a little bit. The sounds being altered and perceived differently depending on the room the player is in really adds to the map's environment and atmosphere. Along with those presets that make the rooms sound different, I also added environmental sounds. I added mechanical and industrial sounds to the facility areas, computer sounds to the lab area, jet sounds to the freezer areas, and cricket sounds outside. I also want to talk about this outside area a little bit. Even though it's the part I made first and it's the part that the player spends the least amount of time in, this is probably my favorite part of the map. Aside from just wanting to make terrain, another reason I wanted to make this part is because I always enjoyed the atmosphere and aesthetic of Half-Life, especially the outside areas. The area where the rocket gets launched and on a rail, and also the area before that, are some of my favorite spots in the game. It's nighttime, and after all the enemies are cleared out, it's just a quiet and peaceful area compared to the rest of the game, only broken up by the sound of crickets. This area of my map is inspired by that area. That's why I added crickets and made it nighttime. I'm also realizing it's kind of on brand too. Anyways, I added a lot of ambient sounds, maybe too many, because at one point some sounds would randomly get cut off, like the HEV suit logon speech. So I had to go through the map and delete some ambient sounds to fix that. I think all these ambient sounds add to the environment, but let me know if you found them too loud or annoying even. Textures are also part of the environment. I really should have focused on textures more. I did design the freezers around the freezer textures, but there are still some weird situations where they get cut off. The other areas of the map, I just randomly picked textures and applied them. Again, a lot of the rooms I made, I only decided what they would be after I made them. There's a lot of weird texturing, like textures that get cut off or are poorly aligned, or textures that don't go well together. It's just another thing I need to improve on next time, because even just a few messed up textures can ruin the environment. Still on the topic of environment, Half-Life is supposed to be a horror game too, so I did add some poor scientists and security guards. They're here to help show the horrors that are up ahead and what kind of damage that these aliens can cause. In my next map, I want to add friendly NPCs that aren't as sleepy. Interacting with friendly NPCs is a highlight of most people's Half-Life playthrough, so it is kinda lame that this map doesn't have any. Even with all the flaws of this map, I'm still proud of it. I was able to learn how to use these tools and actually make and finish a map. I think it's a decent first map, but that's not really up to me to decide, so let me know what you think about this map in the comments, and I'll take any feedback and constructive criticism into account for my next map. If you've decided you want to play my map, there's a download link in the description with installation instructions. I also included the source map files if you want to see how I made certain things. If you played my map, I really appreciate you for taking the time to play it. Thank you for watching to the end, and have a good night.